Let's talk about Travis Hunter for a minute because he might be the most interesting player in this entire draft class and in college football generally because, we've seen two-way players before. I can't remember the last time we saw a genuine two-way player at a position where he's basically playing 100% of the snaps in both directions, right? This is not a situational role on both sides of the ball. It's not a superstar player on one side who has like a package on the other side. This is a guy who's their number one corner and also their number one wide receiver at the same time and is playing like 100+ snaps a game, just a ridiculous rate. That doesn't happen. And he's the only guy that's doing it or that's done it for any period of time. So we're now in this world where people have to figure out what he is because he's really good at both of them. I think a lot of people, like I've seen an equal number of people essentially say he's a cornerback at the next level, he's a wide receiver at the next level. I don't think anybody is seriously entertaining the idea that he can be both in the NFL. But how do you look at his tape and decide what position you're going to play him at?
I think, lately I've been leaning towards he's a really, really good receiver, but he could be the best corner on the planet, right? But then I just, I was going back and projecting out some numbers because I wonder how much we'd be freaking out about Hunter had he not taken the cheap shot against Colorado State that basically caused him to miss the better part of 4 games, right? And if you project out his receiving numbers across the whole season, if he didn't miss those games, this is a guy with 85 catches and over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. So you're talking about a legitimate 1,000-yard receiver in college. And if you take out the Stanford game, where, to your point, he played 167 snaps against Stanford, and he's having to cover man-to-man one of the best receivers in the country, in Alec Iamaner from Stanford, this is a freakish talent. I actually don't know how it's possible that he missed basically 4 games and he led the nation in snaps. It's just the level of talent, and even Trevor's mentioned his ball skills on both sides of the ball are just elite. I look at those receiving numbers, and you look at him, and he's a deep threat. He plays in the slot a lot for Colorado. He can be a slot receiver easily at the next level. My gut instinct is like he could be a top 5, if not the number 1 corner in the NFL. But it's hard to deny the receiving ability and go, man, there's some team, maybe at number 1 overall, do you give him a shot both ways? Because he's just a transcendent talent. You have to argue he's the most talented player in college football, right? And like what he can do both ways. If he were to do that, if he were to put up an 80+ coverage grade and a 1,000-yard receiving season, he almost has to win the Heisman Trophy. And if he does that, then you're talking about number 1 overall pick. But I think it's the more I look at it the last couple of days, I think it's a lot closer than I thought it was before. I thought before for sure he'd be a corner and he would sparingly play offense, or he'd be a punt returner or whatever. He might be a true two-way guy when you really project out what he could do for a full season receiving.
The intriguing thing about him, I don't think that playing two ways like full-time in the NFL, I just don't think it's an option. Number one, I think you can see it, like as crazy as 160-something snaps is in college, you could see it actually affect him at times. He was gassed, right? Which is not a knock on him. Like if he wasn't gassed at any point during playing 160-something snaps, it would be ridiculous. So you could see plays where he was gassed and struggling and that kind of thing. And, that probably hurt his coverage numbers, right? Like, he gave up 5 touchdowns. If he wasn't playing wide receiver at the same time, you would assume he'd be more fresh, better able to handle that, et cetera. So, okay, the NFL, you might have longer breaks potentially. You have fewer snaps across the board anyway. It might be slightly easier. I just don't think it's a real option, though. For no other reason than like those meetings take place at the same time, right? Offense and defense split up and go, one goes into one room, the other goes into another room. He's got to be in 2 places at once to get even just the knowledge to figure out how to play both sides at the same time. So I can see him playing one or the other with a package. Like I could see him being a corner that has a package and plays offense for a few snaps a game. I can't really see him being a full-time player in either direction. But it does make it difficult to evaluate what he's doing in college because that fatigue is a bigger problem for a DB than it is for a wide receiver, right? If your wide receiver's tired on a play, worst thing that will happen is he'll just not really get the target on that play, or you can, it's just, it sort of diminishes his overall numbers. If he's tired playing corner, he might get toasted and give up a touchdown, and now that's a part of his tape, and you're like, look, this guy got beat by this receiver, et cetera, et cetera. So it actually affects his evaluation from a cornerback standpoint, I think, more than it does from a wide receiver. So I kind of look at him and think, I wonder if you're going to start seeing more and more people skew towards thinking he's a wide receiver because the cornerback tape is the thing that's getting affected more by the playing two ways thing.
Something I thought about lately too is something that might affect his own and whoever his agent's decision is the money that wide receivers get compared to cornerbacks, right? We're seeing wide receivers get into the $35-40 million range in free agency and in their extensions, and you've got corners still sitting in the low 20s, right? So maybe when he gets to the NFL, he tells them, hey, I'm a receiver. Maybe I could help you on defense or certain things, but I want to max out the contracts. I want to max out my second and third contract to where I'm getting, if I'm this good, I'm getting 35, and at that point, probably $40 million for a number one type of receiver. I think I've wondered lately how much of it is a business decision on his own end. For as much as he probably could be the best corner in the NFL, is it worth it? Is it worth the money, especially as volatile year to year as cornerback play can be for anybody that's pretty much not named Sauce Gardner? You've got a situation where now there's money on the table too, right? Is he worth even more than any receiver because you could throw him out there at corner for 20 snaps instead? So there are so many factors. It's such a unique thing that we've never seen before, because I know, like back in the day, Charles Woodson was a two-way guy and won a Heisman, or I know more recently Adoree Jackson took receiver reps at USC when he was playing there. But this is the first time, at least, that I've seen a true two-way guy. They all do it in high school. They're all just that good, right? But a true two-way guy that can do it at the FBS level. And last year playing corner in one of the toughest, conferences to play pass defense you've ever seen, right? I mean, you've got Caleb Williams and Michael Penix and Bo Nix and all these great offenses in the Pac-12 coming down the pipe every single week. And other than the Stanford game, when he gave up pretty much all of those yards in the second half of that game, to your point, just gassing out. Okay, he gave up a 40-yard touchdown. I believe it was either late in the fourth quarter or in overtime, but it was like his 160th snap of the game. So the context of it makes it hard too, because most guys on a football field, they're gassing at 85 or 90 snaps, and he's making it into 150 and 160, and he's still reasonably competitive out there even at that point. He's a level of freak that we really haven't seen before, but I do wonder if the business side of it says, for him, he's like, I really should play receiver to max out my contract extensions.
It's impossible to overstate just how crazy 160 something snaps in a game is. Like we've talked about, in games that go crazy long or there's overtime and defenses end up playing 100 snaps. Like 100 snaps in the NFL is past the point where you're like, okay, those guys are toast. They can't play anymore. Of course, they're giving up yardage at the end of the game. They're giving up big plays. They're the reason the team sort of ends up losing overall. And you're adding 60 more on top of that because he's playing offense as well. It's just absolutely ridiculous, the volume of playing time that he has at the moment. It's also an interesting wrinkle that obviously the head coach of Colorado was Deion Sanders, who himself was something of a two-way player in the NFL, and obviously a two-sport guy with baseball as well. But, Sanders did that where he had an offensive package. They played him on offense in Dallas. They had him returning. They played him in a lot of different ways. So it's an intriguing coach to kind of theoretically help guide Travis Hunter through this not unprecedented, but extremely unusual situation of being this two-way player.